Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Global Marketing Management. My name, as you know, is Deji Okuneye, the subject writer. And I'm really excited to be sharing what we've organized here, an interview with Rob McGowan. Rob is actually the Vice President of our International Marketing and Student Growth team here at Torrance. And I believe he's the perfect person for us to be talking to about the reality of this subject. So, Rob, thank you so much. And we're going to keep this conversational. Rob has a lot of gems, real world experience to share. I do believe that his journey is very much one that you would want to emulate through your MBA journey. So, Rob, if you don't mind, please introduce yourself. Give us, a summary of your story, like where you're from, where you started, what's led you to this point.
I've worked in education for nearly 20 years now, actually. I made my way through various different positions in universities, principally here in Australia and also in the UK. And through that journey, it's taken me down a number of different paths, but generally in student recruitment and marketing, and particularly focused in university administration and revenue generating teams. It's a really interesting role, and very challenging. But certainly, as you said in your very kind intro of me, the focus is as much on how we're perceived and how we're positioning ourselves overseas and offshore to grow Torrance University as a global brand, as it is the focus here in Australia, and making sure that we are recognised as a really exceptional part of the Australian higher education system. So very exciting. 20 years it's gone into arriving here, but yeah, a really new dynamic role at a new and dynamic university.
So I can see, I would imagine you would agree that this is the right person for us to be talking about in this particular subject, in that he lives and has lived the topic of this subject. So, Rob, you've already touched on something really significant, where one of Australia's, fastest growing, newly established universities, and we're, should I say, already spreading our wings globally. So what are your thoughts on this? Like what kind of challenges, opportunities come with exactly that? A newly established university relative to others, already looking to establish a brand perception and image around the world. Like what's that like for you?
I think the first thing to touch on is the challenge, and you mentioned what is the challenge. In many different industries, and when you're looking at products, new means exciting, innovative, and customers, particularly younger customers, Gen Z, they want something that's new and exciting. When you take that same concept and you put it in a university context, well, old and familiarization is what often prospective students, advisors, parents are looking for. They would tend to think universities are places that have been around longer than them and have a history that goes back over generations of families and all that type of thing. So the first thing we have at Torrance is we have a challenge that we are new, and that's been a really interesting challenge for us, both in Australia and overseas, to be able to communicate with students that they can have real confidence in a university that, albeit is new, is exciting, is innovative, and in the way that we've done things, by trying to do things differently and deliver outstanding outcomes for students that put their confidence in us through innovative, flexible delivery models, by effectively being different, we've been able to carve ourselves a reputation that new in this instance is actually a really positive thing for our prospective students and our partners. So, but that's a real challenge, going into a traditional sector with kind of fundamentals that are understood and being an agitator in that and being confident enough to be bold and different, to connect with a different audience, has not been without its challenges. But I think after 10 years, we've had a lot of success in growing our student numbers through that pretty bold approach.
So that's what this is, right? It takes marketing to achieve that, and it'll continue to take marketing efforts. Nothing, and correct me if I'm wrong, nothing else will achieve this kind of goal and objective besides effective marketing. Mm-hmm. The shaping of perceptions and building of confidence in the product or the service, which you're doing really well. So this particular subject, it's marketing, but it's marketing in a global context. Within what you just said about the importance of being able to deliver on mm-hmm. what you've promised, is that particularly significant when you are dealing with international markets, mm-hmm. like with Asia or wherever else? You know, when you're from Australia, looking to establish a brand elsewhere, how important is this point internationally?
Mm-hmm. When you're looking globally, like the world's a huge place, right? So the first thing you've got to do is get away from the fact that you're going to be everything for everyone everywhere. Like, it's just not possible, right? When you're thinking about global, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So the first thing that you need to think about is, once you really understand, and if you're a confident university or a confident organization, you will understand what your strengths are as an organization. And for us, it's our institutional strengths. So we know that our institutional strengths are based on the things I mentioned earlier about, you know, being different, being agile, being flexible, delivering really practical outcomes. There's many markets in the world that aren't looking for that. And I think the first thing you need to do is be selective over your targeting and segmentation. And that's true here in Australia, but it's true in international markets. So there are markets across the world where our value proposition resonates really strongly. And there's a direct correlation between what we can deliver, the outcomes we can deliver, and what students in those markets want from a university. So part of it is about like having that real connection between marketing messages and what you deliver. But I think the more important part is actually then, once you understand that, is going through the process of segmentation, on targeting, on understanding your proposition, and matching your institutional strengths with a market need. And effectively, then the world becomes a small place, because you're not looking at countries and nationalities, you're actually addressing an audience that you already know resonates with your product. They just happen to be in different countries around the world. And the challenge then is just finding them, finding the target audience, rather than trying to change your marketing messages too much or your proposition to match multiple different markets. As I said, you can be, we can do anything, we can't do everything, and you certainly can't be everything to everyone. So find your people, you know your product, and really it shouldn't be any more difficult than that.
Am I right that it does sound easier said than done, as in, actually, would you say, is it hard or easy to find those people, you know, the right people in the right markets? Because that point is so heavy, that of not trying to be all things to all people, but rather identify your target market that's looking for what you have to offer. Mm-hmm. But then when we're looking across the pond at different cultures and different markets and such like that, how hard or easy is that to do? Even if you're clear on what your value proposition is, what's involved in trying to actually identify which markets are looking for what you have to offer?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I've probably made it sound easier than it is. I think the easy part is understanding what you need to do. Actually executing on that is a really complicated task. But two things here. One, at some point, there has to be a decision that's made. And I think people get paralyzed sometimes by, they call it analysis paralysis, right? I think that does happen. And particularly when you're looking at like multiple markets, there is so much data, there's so much research. You could spend a lifetime trying to answer the question about, you know, where these target audiences are. Mm-hmm. So I think it's finding a balance between finding those inputs, doing the research, and ultimately using your experience and being decisive to give things a go. I think what we do and what we try and do well is we try and have as diversified a portfolio as possible in where we're trying to target these audiences. So knowing that things that are outside of our control in some markets, may change the particular opportunity there, and that can happen overnight. So, you need to be able to have multiple different things going on at once. You don't put all your eggs in one basket to try and then find these prospective students, but you kind of diversify your channels to be able to try things, test if it works, knowing that a lot of what you do might not work, and that's okay. It's okay to have activity that you have full confidence is going to work, and actually it doesn't pay off, and that's absolutely fine. So, I think there's a balance between going into something and feeling 100% confident it's going to work, and actually just getting to the point that you think it's the right thing to do, and investing and giving it a go. And sometimes you'll find out that was the right thing, sometimes you won't. But if you have enough of those initiatives going on at the same time, and you've diversified your channels enough, then you're balancing the risk of failure against the opportunity of success. So, I think it's about finding a balance, really.
So in the midst of all this, going into other markets, Rob, what are your thoughts on, because you've really painted a clear picture about being clear on what you have to offer, what you really are, what your strengths are, right? What your value proposition is, But then you're going into other markets still, even if they are, quote unquote, looking for what you have to offer. How important is it to localize your message? Again, you want to preserve what's unique about you. You're this new, innovative Australian brand in this case. Should you, how much of that do you maintain in your messaging versus customizing or localizing messages to different global markets?
Yeah, I'd say that's a really good question, because I think you can understand you've got like we have a list of value propositions. And what I would say is you want to stay true to your value proposition irrespective of where you are. But you do need to tailor that to the specific characteristics or needs of any particular market. So again, I think it's about finding a balance of staying true, genuine, authentic to the product or service that you're offering. And for us, that's a university education when it's offshore, predominantly here in Australia. You need to stay true to that, but at the same time, one market may have far more interest in, say, employability outcomes. Another maybe want to have more information on the specific curriculum delivery or whatever it may be. There's lots of different facets to our product. So I think how you present and what you present in each market has to change. And then the other thing is your kind of go-to-market strategy. Every market has different communication channels, has different routes into market to access that audience. So, now the digital tools that we have access to are so much more sophisticated than what it was when I started my career 20 years ago. So the routes into market are perhaps easier, although slightly more complex. But they're very different. So each market offshore has a different digital approach. One thing that I will say as well, irrespective of where you're operating, I don't think anything can ever replace having boots on the ground. And if you're really serious about being accepted in a market, having a presence in that market and investing in the market, so actually making an investment to show that you're there, you're serious about the audience in that market, you're serious about investing long term, goes a long way, not just with your prospective students in our case, but also with partners, with government relations, which are really important offshore. So I don't think anything can really replace, if you identify there is a market where there is a big opportunity or an audience that will resonate with our particular offering, then making an investment to be there, be present, be on the ground, getting the expertise of people that live, work, and understand that audience. I don't think anything can can really replace the value that brings in return. So, yeah, I think there's a mix between your kind of digital marketing channels, some of your traditional, advertising and brand activity that we have, and then also just having people who understand the market and understand the networks in markets on the ground representing you, and sort of translating that back as well. I guess the only other point I would make is that I mentioned it earlier. When you think of a global opportunity, the world's a really big place, and no one can know everything about any market, let alone every market. So the partnerships, the networks, the people that you have on the ground in each market, the quality of those relationships will ultimately define success and failure. If you've got the right people representing you, either in your team or representing you as a partner, then you will be successful. And if you have the wrong people, then you will not.
No, this is very specific, very poignant to the things that are discussed in this subject. In fact, I have exactly what you're talking about right now highlighted, because even with this, as you said it, there would still be risk associated with kind of possibly handing over your reputation to these partners. What are your thoughts on that? Like, for any kind of business looking to follow your lead, really making the most of partnerships to enter different markets. Are there any kind of nuances to doing that well? Because, right, you've done all this work to even establish some kind of brand image or reputation or value offering. Now you're asking someone, yes, it's good that they're localized, but any risks or issues that come with that, with partnering locally to spread?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest risks with any global operation is selecting the right partners. If you get the wrong partner, then it will fail, and that can be costly on a number of fronts. You mentioned reputational damage, but also just from an investment point of view, there is a level of investment with any partnership you enter, even where some of those partnerships are for mutual benefit. So in an agreement, there might not be any financial transaction. It's all based on mutual benefit and partnership. But those partnerships still need to be managed. They need to be looked after and nurtured, and all of that costs. So, getting the selection of partners wrong is pretty much terminal for entering an offshore market. How I try and approach it, firstly, and really this is a skill that comes with being in the role that I'm in, and the skill that my team have. You need to engage not with one potential partner, not with two potential partners, but you really need to invest time and effort in sitting down and meeting with and listening to, tens and tens of different potential partners. And I really think that the time and effort spent in doing that is a good investment in time. Once you've decided a market is worth investing in, then you need to make sure that you're listening and learning from people that are operating in that market, and working out what type of partner is right, and also who might be the right potential partner for you to enter. And then the second thing is, once you've made that selection, to start slow. Whenever you have these discussions, and they're generally business development discussions, so the sky's the limit, and it's really exciting when you're looking for new partners. Some of the conversations, the potentials, the opportunities, they're absolutely endless. And actually, if you put them down onto paper, they look unrealistic. And often it's because, well, they are. So my key to this is that once you've decided to select a partner, go for the minimum viable starting point. Like, what is the MVP of this partnership to just deliver 1% of incremental value, and do that. And then only do that, and do that until you've done it and it's finished. And then start to think bigger and grow on that. So, in that first year in this type of role, you always want to get these big, quick wins. And every conversation you have presents the opportunity for this big win, like the transformational partnership. And all I would say is to absolutely live on that energy and don't lose that ambition, but just maybe get there in year 2. Once you've established a sound partner and you know that they're the right organisation or the right, for us, the right university to actually go and invest with. So yeah, be selective, start slow, and then build up to the ambitions.
Sounds like if it seems too good to be true, it probably is, sort of.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can really get lost, you can really get, you can spend a lot of time and energy investing in conversations that actually, if you'd have just gone back to the core principle and said, why are we entering this market? What is our outcome for this market? Have we done that assessment of our institutional strengths and the correlation with the market need? Have we done that? And have we got a basis for why we're having this conversation? And very often, if you then take a step back and just return to that as an anchor, so you've got this anchor all the time that's saying, to use as a litmus test, is this the right partner for us? Then actually, if you've done that, you've got the discipline to do that, quite often you can save yourself from diving down these rabbit holes and invest in time, energy, and resource in ultimately great sounding opportunities, but they're probably not appropriate for your institution or your organization.
What are your thoughts, Rob, on emerging markets, right? Markets, where, their economies, a lot of times their younger populations are higher. Maybe what one might say represent great opportunities for an institution like Torrance University. But, they are emerging markets, so they're probably underdeveloped in terms of legalities, infrastructure. Maybe it's even a small proportion of the population that can afford our product or service. What are your thoughts on that? Like, coming from your standpoint, Torrance in Australia looking to expand. You talked about a portfolio of different markets to look at. So in our world of today, where do you see emerging markets, maybe in Africa or certain parts of Asia? Yeah, where do they sit relative to a Western institution like Torrance?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, there's a great opportunity for universities in Australia and I guess Western, established Western education systems to sort of export education to these developing markets. And there's certainly an appetite from the development markets to engage in that through transnational education or various different means. And the other thing is there's populations there that are underserved that we can support with because we've got a lot of experience in doing that. So certainly the opportunity is great. I think the point you're getting out of the question is really around how do you kind of manage or mitigate the potential risks or pitfalls with entering those markets. And what I would say is the key for any kind of activity that you're looking to do outside of Australia, particularly in developing markets, is not to underestimate the level of time, energy, resource, and investment you need to get to the point that you're going to be confident that the quality of delivery that you're able to deliver in that country is absolutely in line with what you would expect to deliver at home.
So in the midst of all that, for a company, any kind of business looking to do this, looking to expand and achieve consistency and standards and the like, within what you just said, is it ever okay in the beginning, in the offset, to accept a slightly lower standard relative to that emerging market in the hopes of building that up to the home standard? Should you always be aiming for the home country standard wherever you go? Or is there ever room, given the different status or levels of different markets, to maybe go different levels in different markets?
Yeah, I think you have to, so yes and no. I think you have to make sure that if you're delivering a product in another country, then it has currency in that country and it's relevant for the audience. I don't think you should ever compromise, certainly as a university, on the quality of delivery and the quality of outcomes. But there is definitely a balancing act here between particularly from a financial point of view, if you're delivering an Australian qualification overseas, for example, and you're delivering that with a cost base of an Australian cost base, it's not going to be viable. So you need to find ways, and you need to be innovative, and this is probably where really good partners come in, to be able to make sure that you're not compromising on quality, but that your cost base and the cost of your course or product to prospective students is relative to the market, to the local market. So I would say, yes, it needs to be adapted. No, you should never compromise on quality, but you will have to find a way to deliver that quality in the context of the local market.
With this, and you hinted to this earlier, with data, intellectual property, right, being a major issue for any kind of global company or organization today, does that come into play as the head of future students involved in our marketing? What is the role of like data privacy laws, intellectual property, in terms of taking something Australian into other markets?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think there's privacy is a really good example, and there's a number of others. There's a list of considerations, irrespective of where you're operating, but particularly if you're looking to operate in a different jurisdiction, there is zero risk appetite. Privacy would be one example of this. So one of the things you need to consider would be how data is held, how you manage data, and the privacy of your prospective students. And that would be an area where that would be prohibitive to continuing with that activity if you're not able to meet the Australian standards as we're expected to for privacy law. Now that's very difficult, but that's really, again, the key of having great partners. I think sometimes as well, it's easy to underestimate how sophisticated in developing markets, how sophisticated your partners can be. There is very sophisticated operators, and if you find the right ones, they will understand the importance of things like privacy, and also just the fact that there is zero risk appetite. So if you can't get those things right, and if you can't satisfy that you're able to meet the standards that we're required to as an Australian company, which are some of the strictest in the world, rightly so, then that would be prohibitive to continuing with a partnership. There are other things that there's more risk appetite about, particularly with student recruitment and marketing. You never know for sure that you're going to get the student numbers that you hope, and that's something you have a level of risk on, right? And you would have a sensitivity model and say, well, it could be this many, it could be this many, and we think it's still worth investing. But with something like privacy, there's no sensitivity model. It's either 100% compliance or prohibitive to continuing. So I think you just have to weigh up all of those different considerations and assess them on their own merits, and each of them will have kind of a different weighting to whether or not you go ahead with a new partnership or entering a new market.
Gosh, so Rob, would you go as far as saying, would it be your advice to any kind of organization going into other markets that if the data privacy laws are lax or below the home country standards, is that a no-go right away? Like, or are there ever cases where, depending on the industry or market, it's understandable in education, maybe in financial services and the like, but could there be other kinds of businesses that can afford to be a bit more lax with things like data privacy?
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to think of where it would be appropriate that you would compromise on that.
Because I take you're very strong on the zero bandwidth on that, which is quite it's a significant issue. That's why we're talking about it. And just trying to gauge your insight on. It sounds as though from your perspective, that's one of those things where it's either 100 or nothing. Yeah,
and I think. So what I would say is, I think that where the assessment of the relative sort of legislative frameworks in the market don't align with your home market, If that is something like privacy, where there's zero consideration of risk, then really it's on you as the in this instance offshore entity to find a solution to satisfy your risk appetite. So I don't think it's always to say, well, that's prohibitive, we can't operate in that market. It's how that operates in that market does not meet with our requirements. So we need to find a solution that does in order to enable that. And then that becomes part of any business case. It's basically an enabler of the project. Satisfy the privacy laws, and then you go through another milestone and you carry on. So yeah, I think what I'm saying is you can't compromise, but you can certainly find an alternative solution. Where data is stored and how it's managed, irrespective of where you're operating, you can do those things differently so that you can satisfy your own requirements.
What is the role of culture for someone that's really made a successful life and career out of marketing and global marketing? And what are your tips or thoughts and insights around the role of both the different cultures but also the global culture?
The role of culture, I think it's something that you need to be acutely aware of, and certainly when you're operating in lots of different countries and with people from different backgrounds and different nationalities, I think you need to be culturally sensitive and understand different cultures and be able to adapt to that. I think culture in the sense of building a culture and building a team, it is really essential, particularly when, again, you're operating in quite a complex, fragmented kind of team. And I always go back to things that I've mentioned earlier. Actually, is to develop a really positive sort of dynamic culture. It starts with having a common goal and having an anchor. And I've used that term a few times about having something to go back to. And I use that in my everyday work, but I'd like to think that my teams, the partners that we work with, the culture's developed around an anchor point. It develops around an objective, a common goal that you share with your team, you share with your partners. Irrespective of where they are, everyone understands what's at the center and everyone understands the anchor. And then from that builds out respect for each other and basically a positive culture from a kind of simple understanding at the center of what we're trying to achieve and the fundamentals of how we're going to achieve it. Generally, I think from that stems a really sort of positive culture, irrespective of where people are, because they've got a common goal to work to.
What tips do you have? What more invisible skills do you feel like have led you to this point that enable you to speak to us in this way about real? What would be things outside of the classroom, outside of the textbook, that you think our students should really be thinking about focusing on if they're looking to be a Rob McGowan in 5 to 10, 15 years?
Putting the value in the people that you surround yourself with, rather than thinking that you need to be the sort of center of everything. It's like I say, liberating yourself almost from an unrealistic expectation will stand everyone in good stead. There's so many talented people that work in my team and that work in partners that we have and that I work with on a daily basis that I'm incredibly impressed by, and I owe a lot in terms of the success we have to the work that they're doing on a daily basis, and recognizing that and celebrating that and making sure that they realize how important they are is far more important than anything I'll do in a day sat in front of a computer on my own. So yeah, I think that probably the key would be to keep it simple and just not try and be the expert in every single conversation and not try and know it all, but surround yourself with really amazing people and make sure they know how amazing they are.
Awesome. Well, you heard it from the man himself. A lot of us at this stage of our career these people are actually our peers, the other people completing an MBA like you are. So maybe even starting to practice through networking, making friendships, working on projects together while you're completing the degree might actually already start to hone your skills towards what Rob is saying, you being that sort of person that can really galvanize the skills and resources of other people and not have to have the answers to everything. So folks, I really hope you take a lot from this conversation and you see why we've chosen Rob to speak to on this. I wish you the best of luck with this subject and just with your whole MBA journey. And we really look forward to maybe one day having one of you be a speaker on a panel like this. So thanks a lot for your attention to this conversation, and take care.